At 27, Melanie Hart had perfected the art of disappearing in plain sight. While London's ballrooms glittered with debutantes and their desperate mothers, she stood against the walls in lilac silk, watching life unfold for everyone but her. Then, one spring evening in 1817, a duke stopped at the doorway and looked back. That single glance would shatter every rule she had learned about her place in society and ignite a love that neither of them expected. Because the most powerful transformations often begin in the quietest moments, when someone finally sees what has been there all along. The ballroom at Harrington House blazed with 1,000 candles, their light catching in the crystal chandeliers and scattering across the polished floor like fallen stars. Melanie Hart stood near the west wall, her lilac gown a whisper of color against the cream silk panels, and watched as London's finest swept past her in waves of laughter and perfume. She had perfected the art of standing just so, close enough to the refreshment table to seem purposeful, far enough from the dancers to avoid the pitying glances. Her fan moved in slow, practiced arcs, cooling air that did not need cooling, occupying hands that would not be held. Across the room, the Duke of Ashford led Miss Caroline Pemberton through a quadrille. Even at a distance, his presence commanded attention. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble, shoulders broad beneath perfectly tailored black evening clothes. At 33, Oliver Ashford moved through society with the ease of a man who had never questioned his place in it. Melanie's aunt, Margaret Langley, appeared at her elbow with a cup of lemonade. At 52, widowed and practical, Margaret had long ago abandoned the pretense that her niece would make a brilliant match. "I saw Lady Hartwell whispering to Mrs. Fletcher," Margaret said quietly. They were looking this way. Melanie accepted the cup without meeting her aunt's eyes. "Let them look. I'm quite accustomed to being part of the scenery. You are worth 10 of any girl here. Worth and value are measured differently in ballrooms, aunt. Here youth and fortune make the scales tip. I possess neither in abundance." The music swelled and the dancers changed partners. The Duke now moved through the steps with a blonde girl Melanie did not recognize, someone newly arrived from the country perhaps, with wide eyes and nervous laughter. Before the set ended, he had danced with Lady Catherine Reynolds, Miss Sophie Hamilton, and twice with Melanie's own cousin Emily. Emily at 22 still possessed the dewy freshness that society prized. She moved like water through the Duke's arms, her pink gown floating, her copper curls catching the light. When the dance ended, she threw a triumphant glance toward where Melanie stood, a look that said, "See how easily I catch what you cannot." Melanie's mother, Catherine Hart, materialized beside them, her face tight with a familiar mixture of disappointment and determination. She was 49 but carried herself as if still navigating the marriage market for herself rather than her daughter. "Emily has danced twice with the Duke," she said, her voice pitched just low enough to avoid nearby ears, but loud enough to ensure the barb landed. "Twice. And he asked her about you." Melanie's fingers tightened on her fan. "About me? He inquired whether you were unwell. Emily told him you preferred observing to participating." Catherine's lips pursed. "I do hope she did not make you sound peculiar." "Perhaps I am peculiar," Melanie said softly. "Perhaps preferring books to empty flattery makes one strange in such company. Books do not lead to marriage. Neither does desperation, mother." The words hung between them, sharp enough to draw blood. Margaret placed a gentle hand on Melanie's arm, a silent plea for peace. Catherine turned away with a rustle of skirts, moving back toward the matrons who gathered near the card room, no doubt to dissect every dance and sleight of the evening. The next set began, a waltz. Melanie watched as the Duke partnered with a widow close to his own age, someone elegant and poised. They moved together with practiced grace, speaking in low tones that suggested intimacy or at least comfortable acquaintance. This was the world he inhabited, one of ease and belonging. She turned slightly, intending to retreat to the ladies' withdrawing room, when she felt it. A gaze, weighted and deliberate, pressing against her consciousness like a hand on her shoulder. Her breath caught, and against every instinct that told her to remain invisible, she looked up. Across the ballroom, through the swirling dancers and shifting light, the Duke of Ashford met her eyes. It lasted only a moment, perhaps 2. His partner said something, drawing his attention back, and the connection broke. But in that brief intersection of gazes, Melanie felt something shift inside her chest. Not hope. She had learned better than hope, but recognition. As if, for one impossible second, she had been seen. The waltz ended. The Duke escorted his partner from the floor, bowing over her hand with impeccable courtesy. He moved through the crowd, accepting greetings and deflecting conversation with practiced ease. Melanie watched him progress toward the exit, certain now that the moment had been imaginary, a trick of candlelight and her own desperate mind. Then, at the doorway, he stopped. He turned, his gaze sweeping the ballroom until it found her again. This time there was no mistaking it. He looked directly at her, his expression unreadable in the distance, but his attention absolute. The moment stretched, long enough to make her heart stumble, long enough to hurt. Then he was gone, disappearing into the corridor beyond, leaving Melanie standing by the wall with her pulse racing and her mind spinning with a single impossible question. Why did he look at me? Around her, the ballroom continued its glittering dance. The music soared, couples twirled, laughter rose and fell like waves. But Melanie stood perfectly still, her lilac gown a splash of color against the cream wall, and felt the foundations of her carefully constructed invisibility beginning to crack. Margaret touched her arm again. "Are you all right, dear? You have gone quite pale." Melanie drew a breath, steadying herself. "I am well, Aunt. Simply tired. Shall we call for the carriage?" "Yes." Melanie closed her fan with trembling fingers. "Yes, I think we should." As they made their way toward the exit, Melanie caught Emily's gaze across the room. Her cousin smiled, a small, satisfied curve of lips that said she had won whatever unspoken competition existed between them. Melanie did not smile back. She was too busy trying to understand what had just happened, why a duke who had danced with every eligible woman in the room had stopped at the doorway to look back at the one he had ignored all evening. The night air hit her face as they stepped outside, cool and sharp after the hothouse warmth of the ballroom. The carriage waited, and Margaret helped her mother inside before climbing up herself. Melanie settled into the cushions, grateful for darkness and privacy. Through the carriage window, she could see Harrington House blazing with light, could hear the faint strains of another waltz beginning. Inside, the beautiful people continued their beautiful dance, spinning through a world she had never quite managed to enter. But something had changed tonight. She did not understand it yet, could not name it, but she felt it as surely as she felt her own heartbeat. The Duke had looked at her. Twice. And in a world where she had spent years learning to disappear, being seen felt like the most dangerous thing of all. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of Oliver Ashford's study, casting geometric patterns across the Persian rug and the scattered correspondence on his mahogany desk. He stood with his back to the room, one hand braced against the window frame, watching the London streets come alive below. Vendors called their wares. Carriages clattered past. The city stirred itself awake. But his mind remained fixed in the candle-lit ballroom of the previous evening. Lord George Hartley, his closest friend since their days at Cambridge, lounged in one of the leather chairs, a cup of coffee balanced on his knee. He had arrived uninvited, as was his habit, and had been studying Oliver with the kind of scrutiny that came from years of friendship. "You are brooding," George observed. "I can tell because you have not insulted me once since I arrived, which means your thoughts are elsewhere entirely." Oliver turned from the window. "I am not brooding. I am thinking. About the emptiness of it all." George raised an eyebrow. "That is unusually philosophical for 10 o'clock in the morning. Did Lady Pemberton's conversation prove that taxing?" Oliver moved to his desk, rifling through the Morning Post without really seeing it. "I danced with 7 women last night." 7. Each one accomplished, beautiful, entirely suitable, and I cannot remember a single meaningful word any of them spoke. Perhaps you were not listening. I was listening. That is precisely the problem. Oliver picked up a letter, then set it down again. Miss Hamilton discussed the weather. Lady Reynolds catalogued her family's connections. Miss Pemberton giggled. Your cousin Emily spoke of nothing but fashion and her own charms. Emily is 22. What did you expect? Philosophy. I expected something real. Oliver's voice carried an edge he had not intended, something that resembled an actual thought or feeling. Instead, I received performance after performance, each one calibrated to display accomplishment without substance. George set down his coffee and leaned forward. What brought this on? Last month you seemed perfectly content to play your role in society's theatre. Oliver did not answer immediately. He moved to the fireplace, where embers from the morning fire still glowed. In the mantel mirror he caught his own reflection. Dark hair slightly disheveled, eyes shadowed from poor sleep. The face of a man who appeared to have everything yet felt increasingly hollow. There was a woman, he said finally, at the ball. She stood near the west wall most of the evening. Lilac gown, dark hair, perhaps 7 and 20. She did not dance once. And she was the only person in that entire ballroom who looked truly present. Everyone else was performing, but she was simply being, watching, taking it all in with these remarkable eyes that seemed to see everything. George's expression shifted to something between amusement and concern. You are interested in a wallflower. I am interested in authenticity. Oliver turned to face his friend. Do you know what I saw in her face? Resignation, dignity, intelligence. Not the desperate grasping I see in every debutante's eyes, not the calculation of mothers weighing my title against their daughters' dowries. Just a woman existing in a space that clearly caused her pain, bearing it with more grace than I have seen in supposedly accomplished ladies. Did you speak with her? No. Dance with her? No. Then how can you possibly know all this? Oliver moved back to his desk, unable to articulate what he had felt in those 2 moments when their eyes met. The first had been accidental, a brief intersection of gazes across a crowded room, but something in that look had struck him like a physical blow. Not attraction precisely, though she had been lovely in an understated way, but recognition, as if he had glimpsed something rare and true in a world of beautiful masks. The second time had been deliberate. At the doorway, unable to help himself, he had turned back. Found her standing exactly where he had left her, a splash of lilac against cream walls, and felt it again. That sense of meeting someone who might actually be worth knowing. I watched her, Oliver said, and I saw more honesty in her stillness than in all the animated conversation and practiced smiles combined. George stood, brushing imaginary lint from his waistcoat. You realize this sounds quite mad, does it? Oliver's laugh held no humor. Perhaps I am going mad. Perhaps spending years fulfilling duty and expectation while ignoring every genuine impulse has finally cracked something inside me. Or perhaps you are simply tired of the game. George's voice softened. Heaven knows I would be. Every matchmaking mama in London hunting you, every conversation weighted with implication, every smile calculated to catch a duke. It would exhaust anyone. A knock at the door interrupted them. Oliver's secretary entered, carrying a silver tray with a single envelope. From Her Grace, the secretary said, marked urgent. Oliver took the letter, recognizing his mother's elaborate script. He broke the seal and scanned the contents, his jaw tightening with each line. What is it? George asked. A list. Oliver held up the paper. 20 names of suitable young ladies, complete with family connections, dowry amounts, and notable accomplishments. My mother has helpfully ranked them by order of preference. How efficient. She wants an answer by the end of the season. A betrothal announcement. A wedding before winter. Oliver crumpled the letter slowly, as if marriage were a business transaction to be completed according to a schedule. For people like us, it generally is. Oliver moved to the window again, the crushed paper still in his fist. Below, a flower seller arranged her baskets, ribbons of color against the gray stone. An ordinary woman doing ordinary work, living an ordinary life. He wondered if she was happy, if simplicity brought its own kind of peace. Find out who she is, he said without turning. Who? The woman in lilac. Discreetly. I do not want to cause gossip or put her in an awkward position, but find out her name, her circumstances, where she might be found. George was quiet for a long moment. You are serious about this. I am serious about wanting one honest conversation in my life. If that makes me mad, so be it. And if she is penniless? Unsuitable? If your mother disapproves? Oliver finally turned, meeting his friend's gaze with steady determination. then I will have had one honest conversation with someone real. That alone would be worth more than another evening of choreographed pleasantries with women who see a title instead of a man. George nodded slowly. Very well. I will make inquiries. But Oliver, be careful. You are playing with fire in a world built of paper. One spark could burn everything. After George left, Oliver stood alone in his study, the morning light growing stronger, warming the rich fabrics and polished wood that surrounded him. Wealth, position, power. He had been born into all of it, raised to wield it, expected to pass it on to the next generation. But standing there with his mother's list of suitable brides crumpled in his hand, he felt the weight of it all like chains. He moved to his desk and pulled out a sheet of writing paper, not to answer his mother, not yet. Instead, he found himself writing a single question, the ink flowing black and definite across white paper. Who are you? 3 words for a woman whose name he did not know, whose voice he had never heard, but whose eyes had shown him something he had not realized he was searching for, the possibility that there might be more to life than the elegant performance he had been executing for 33 years. He set down the pen and stared at the question. Tomorrow, George would bring him information. A name, a family, a context, and then Oliver would have to decide what to do with this strange hunger that had awakened in him, this desire for something real in a world designed to be anything but. Outside, the city continued its morning rhythm. Inside, a duke sat alone with his thoughts and the ghost of a lilac gown, and wondered if courage meant dancing with every woman in the ballroom or finally approaching the one who stood apart from the dance. The gardens at Somerset House spread in careful terraces down toward the Thames. Melanie walked beside her Aunt Margaret, their parasols casting moving circles of shade. The afternoon tea had been her mother's idea, another opportunity to parade Emily before eligible gentlemen. Catherine walked ahead with Emily, their heads bent in conspiratorial whispers. Emily's primrose yellow gown caught the sunlight, making her copper curls glow like burnished metal. "Your mother means well," Margaret said quietly. "My mother means to marry Emily brilliantly and cannot understand why I have failed to do the same." Melanie adjusted her parasol. "I have made peace with it, Aunt. Have you?" Before Melanie could answer, excitement rippled through the gathered guests. Heads turned toward the upper terrace where several gentlemen had arrived. Melanie recognized Lord George Hartley first, and then her breath caught. The Duke of Ashford stood at the top of the terrace, surveying the garden party with those dark, assessing eyes. He wore dove grey, perfectly tailored. 3 days had passed since the Harrington ball, 3 days during which Melanie had tried to convince herself that those 2 moments of eye contact had meant nothing. Now, watching him descend the stairs, she knew she had been lying to herself. Emily positioned herself along his path to the tea pavilion. Other young women did the same, creating a gauntlet of feminine charm. Melanie instinctively moved toward the rose arbor at the garden's edge, seeking shadows and relative privacy. Margaret followed without comment. "They are like hunters setting traps," Margaret observed dryly, "and I am poor prey, not worth the chase." They reached the arbor, where roses tangled overhead in shades of cream and blush pink. The scent enveloped them, sweet and drowsy, mixing with warm earth and cut grass. From here, Melanie could see the entire garden, but remained partially hidden. She watched as the Duke and his companions descended. Lord George was immediately intercepted. The other gentlemen dispersed toward refreshment tables, but Oliver paused at the base of the stairs, his gaze sweeping the garden with deliberate purpose. Melanie's heart began a slow, heavy beat. His gaze moved past Emily, past the refreshment tables, past clusters of conversation. It traveled along rose-lined paths until it reached the arbor where Melanie stood in dappled shadow. Their eyes met. In full daylight, with no ballroom crowds between them, the impact felt even stronger. She saw recognition flare in his expression, followed by what looked like relief. He did not look away. Neither did she. Then he moved directly toward the rose arbor, his path a straight line that ignored every attempt to intercept him. Melanie felt Margaret stiffen. "Oh my." "Oh my, indeed," Melanie whispered, her mouth suddenly dry. He reached the arbor's entrance and stopped. Up close she could see details she had missed, The fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the precise cut of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. "Miss Hart," he said, and his voice was deeper than she had imagined, resonating in her chest. "I hoped I might find you here. Your Grace." She dipped into a curtsy. "You know my name. I made inquiries." He stepped into the arbor's shade, and suddenly the space felt intimate. "I did not wish to presume, but after the Harrington ball, I found I could not stop thinking about our encounter. Our encounter. We did not speak, Your Grace. No, but we saw each other." His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her skin warm, and sometimes that is more meaningful than any words. Margaret cleared her throat gently. Oliver turned to her with a slight bow. "Forgive me. I am being appallingly rude." "The Duke of Ashford," Margaret finished. "Yes, Your Grace, I am Mrs. Margaret Langley, and this is my niece, Miss Melanie Hart." "Mrs. Langley, may I have your permission to walk with your niece through the gardens? I promise to remain in full view and return her within a quarter hour." Melanie watched with a sense of unreality. Dukes did not seek out wallflowers in rose arbors. Margaret glanced at Melanie, a silent question. Melanie managed the smallest nod. "A quarter hour," Margaret said firmly. "And yes, in full view. You have my word." Oliver extended his arm. "Miss Hart?" She placed her hand on his sleeve, feeling the warmth of him through the fabric. They stepped into sunlight that seemed suddenly brighter. Around them, whispers rippled through the party. She caught a glimpse of her mother's shocked face, Emily's expression of disbelief and fury. But Oliver seemed oblivious, his attention focused entirely on her. They walked along a path lined with lavender. For several steps, neither spoke. Melanie's awareness narrowed to the pressure of her hand on his arm, the matching rhythm of their footsteps. "I must apologize," he said. "I have made you the center of attention, which I suspect is the last thing you desired." "You are correct, Your Grace. I prefer observation to participation." "Oliver, please, when we are speaking together, I would prefer you call me Oliver." The intimacy of the request shocked her. "That would be highly improper." "More improper than my seeking you out specifically? More improper than my thinking of you for 3 days without respite?" He glanced at her, vulnerability in his expression. "I am weary of propriety that creates distance, Miss Hart. I am searching for something real." They reached a stone bench beneath a flowering hawthorn. Oliver gestured toward it, and they sat, maintaining proper distance but close enough that she could smell his cologne, sandalwood and citrus. "Why me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "You danced with 7 women at the Harrington ball. Beautiful, accomplished women. Yet you remember the one who stood against the wall, because you were the only one who was truly there." Oliver turned to face her fully. The others were performing. You were being. "Do you understand the difference?" "I understand that performance is what society requires. Perhaps that is the problem." His voice carried quiet intensity. "Perhaps we have forgotten how to be authentic, but you, standing there with such dignity and such sadness, you reminded me that authenticity still exists, and I find I am starving for it." Melanie's hands tightened in her lap. "You speak dangerously, Your Grace." "Oliver." She met his eyes. "Oliver." The sound of his name on her lips affected him physically. His shoulders dropped slightly, tension releasing. A shadow fell across them. Emily stood on the path, her face arranged in false concern. "Cousin Melanie, your mother wishes to speak with you. It is rather urgent." Oliver rose, helping Melanie to her feet with a hand that lingered. "Miss Harrington," he said coolly, "Your Grace." Emily's curtsy was calculated. "We did not expect to see you here today. Life is full of pleasant surprises." His tone made clear Emily's interruption was not among them. "Miss Hart, may I call upon you?" "Properly, with your family present." Melanie's heart hammered. "Yes. Yes, you may." "Tomorrow, 2 o'clock?" "Tomorrow." Emily's face went rigid with shock. Melanie moved past her cousin, returning to where Margaret waited. Behind her, she felt Oliver's gaze following, warm as sunlight. When she reached her aunt, Margaret squeezed her hand. "Well," she said quietly, "that was certainly deliberate." Melanie looked back once. Oliver still stood by the hawthorn tree watching her. Their eyes met one more time across the garden's expanse, and she saw him nod slightly. a promise implicit in the gesture. This has meaning, she thought, her pulse racing with equal parts hope and fear. He has chosen to see me, and everything has changed. The Theatre Royal at Drury Lane glowed like a jewel box, its chandeliers casting golden light across velvet and gilding. Melanie sat with Margaret and Catherine, watching Much Ado About Nothing unfold below. The actors moved through Shakespeare's witty banter, Beatrice and Benedict sparring with words as sharp as blades, but Melanie's attention kept drifting to the box across the theatre where Oliver sat. She could feel his presence like a physical weight. The promised call at 2 o'clock had been postponed. A note had arrived that morning, apologizing for urgent business, but requesting to meet her here instead. Her mother had been beside herself, fussing over every detail until Margaret intervened. Now, wearing deep blue silk, Melanie tried to focus on the performance. On stage, Beatrice declared her independence, her refusal to be any man's fool. "He is looking at you again," Margaret whispered. Melanie kept her eyes forward. "How can you tell?" "Because I am looking at him looking at you. He has barely watched the play at all." The first act ended. The house lights came up, and audience members began moving between boxes. Catherine immediately began arranging herself, smoothing her skirts. "If he comes, you must be charming," she told Melanie urgently. "Witty but not too clever. And smile." "Mother, I know how to conduct myself." A knock sounded. Oliver appeared at the door, impeccably dressed in black evening clothes. "Mrs. Hart, Mrs. Langley, Miss Hart." He bowed. "I hope I am not intruding. I wondered if I might join you for the interval." "Your Grace, what a delightful surprise." Catherine's voice went up half an octave. "Please do come in." Oliver entered, taking the chair beside Melanie, close enough that she could smell his cologne, sandalwood, and something uniquely him. "I must apologize again for postponing our meeting," he said, his attention on Melanie despite Catherine's attempts to engage him. "I regretted the necessity deeply. I understand, Your Grace. Business must take precedence." "Must it?" His eyes held hers. "I am beginning to question that assumption." "Are you enjoying the play?" Melanie asked, seeking safer ground. "I confess I have been distracted, but what I have seen is remarkable. Shakespeare understood that we perform for each other constantly, wearing masks that hide our true selves. It takes unusual courage to remove those masks." "As Beatrice does," Melanie said. "She refuses to play the simpering maiden. She speaks her mind, even when it makes her unmarriageable." "And do you admire her for it?" "I admire her honesty. Though society punishes women who possess too much wit or independence, we are meant to be ornamental, not substantial." Oliver leaned forward. "And what do you think of that arrangement?" "I think it wastes half of humanity's potential. Women are capable of depth, of intellect, of contribution, beyond bearing children and managing households. But we are educated just enough to be interesting at dinner parties and not enough to threaten male authority." The silence felt charged. Catherine had gone pale, but Oliver's expression held nothing but fascination. "Go on," he said quietly. "Beatrice is punished by the narrative for her independence. In the end, she must soften, must accept marriage. It is presented as happiness, but I wonder if it is surrender to inevitability. And if Beatrice had refused, then she would have been pitiable. A cautionary tale, because women who refuse marriage are seen as failures." Melanie met his eyes. "We are given the illusion of choice, Your Grace, but there is only one acceptable path." Oliver sat back, wonder in his expression. "That is the most honest thing anyone has said to me in years. It is also quite radical," Catherine interjected nervously. "Melanie reads too much. Ideas are only strange when they challenge comfortable assumptions." Oliver's tone held an edge. "Perhaps we should be grateful for strangeness." A bell chimed, signaling the end of interval. Oliver rose, his gaze remaining on Melanie. "Miss Hart, would you allow me to escort you to the refreshment room? I find I am not ready to end this conversation." Melanie looked at Margaret, who nodded. "Yes, Your Grace." They walked through ornate corridors, Melanie's hand on Oliver's arm. Other theatergoers stared, whispering behind fans. "You are brave," Oliver said when they reached a quiet alcove, "speaking so openly about subjects most women would avoid. Or perhaps foolish. I have likely confirmed I am unmarriageable. On the contrary, you have confirmed you are extraordinary. Do you know how exhausting endless conversations about nothing are? Weather and fashion and safe pleasantries. But you speak as if words matter, as if ideas have weight. They do have weight, Your Grace. Oliver. She met his eyes. Oliver. The sound affected him profoundly. His fingers tightened on his wineglass. I want to know everything about you, he said. What you read, what you think, what makes you angry, and what brings you joy. I want conversations that challenge me. I want something real. Someone real. He paused, catching himself. I have spent my life fulfilling expectations, playing a role assigned by birth. I am the Duke, dignified, appropriate, predictable. But with you, I feel the possibility of being simply myself. Do you understand? I understand wanting to be more than what others expect. But our circumstances are vastly different. You are trapped by privilege. I am trapped by its absence. Perhaps. But we are both trapped. And perhaps we could help each other find a way free. The bell chimed again. Oliver offered his arm, and they walked slowly back, neither quite ready to return. At her box door, Oliver paused. May I call upon you tomorrow? Properly at 2 o'clock. Yes, I have a proposal to discuss with you, something that might interest you greatly. Melanie's heart raced. What kind of proposal? The kind that could change everything. His smile was slight but genuine. If you are willing to take a risk. Before she could respond, he bowed and left. Melanie stood, hand pressed to her chest where her heart hammered. Margaret appeared. Well, that was quite the conversation. He wants to make me a proposal, Melanie whispered. I rather think he already has. The question is whether you are brave enough to accept it. Catherine waited inside, anxious. What did he say? But Melanie could not answer. She settled as the curtain rose on the second act. On stage, Beatrice and Benedict continued their dance of resistance and surrender. Two people who claimed to despise each other were slowly, inevitably falling in love. Melanie understood now why the play resonated. It was not about taming or surrender. It was about two people brave enough to remove their masks, to risk being seen as they truly were. She glanced across the theatre. Oliver watched her, not the stage. Their eyes met and held, a conversation continuing without words. In that moment, Melanie felt something shift. Not hope exactly, but possibility. Her carefully circumscribed life might be about to expand in ways she had never dared imagine. The play continued, and Melanie sat in the darkness, feeling the weight of Oliver's gaze like a hand on her heart, wondering what proposal could possibly change everything. The Hart residence sat on a modest street, in a respectable but unfashionable part of London. 3 stories of weathered brick with window boxes Catherine tended herself. It was a far cry from Mayfair's grand townhouses, but it was home. Now, standing in the small drawing room at precisely 2 o'clock, Melanie felt those limitations acutely. The furniture was worn but clean, the curtains faded but mended. Everything spoke of genteel poverty, of a family clinging to respectability. Catherine had been in near hysteria all morning, cleaning surfaces already clean. Margaret had finally sent her upstairs, leaving Melanie alone to wait. She wore pale green muslin, simple but becoming, her dark hair arranged in soft curls. She had refused her mother's suggestion of excessive jewelry. If Oliver wanted something real, she would give him honesty. The knock came exactly at 2. Their single maid answered and returned with wide eyes. The Duke of Ashford, miss. Oliver entered, and the space immediately felt smaller. He wore charcoal grey, impeccably tailored. In his hands he carried a leather portfolio. Miss Hart. He bowed, his eyes meeting hers with warmth. Thank you for receiving me, Your Grace. She curtsied. Please sit. Margaret appeared, taking position as chaperone near the window. Oliver acknowledged her before settling across from Melanie. I have thought of little else but our conversation at the theatre, Oliver said. Your insights about women's education, about wasted potential, they have stayed with me. I hope I did not speak too freely. It was honest, and honesty is what I value. Oliver leaned forward. I have a proposal for you, but first, do you love books? The question surprised her. I do. Very much. Not simply reading them, but understanding them, organizing them, seeing them as vessels of knowledge that should be accessible to all. Melanie's pulse quickened. Yes, exactly that. Oliver opened his portfolio, withdrawing papers covered in neat handwriting. For 3 generations, the Ashford House Library has been neglected, thousands of volumes in complete disarray, no organization, no way to find anything. He handed her a sheet. This is an inventory my secretary attempted. As you can see, it is inadequate. Melanie scanned the list. No classification system, no notation of condition. This is barely a list, much less a proper catalogue. Precisely. Oliver's eyes held hope. I want to restore the library, make it useful, not just for myself but for others. What do you mean? He withdrew another document. A literacy program for the families in the villages on my estates. Weekly reading circles for adults and children. A lending system so families can borrow books. But it requires someone who understands books, who can organize the library and oversee the program. Melanie's hands trembled as she held the papers. You want me to do this? I want to offer you the position, officially. With proper salary, accommodations when needed at Ashford House, complete authority over the library and reading programs. Oliver's voice carried quiet intensity. You told me women are capable of contribution beyond the drawing room. I'm offering you the chance to prove it. The room seemed to tilt. Melanie looked at Margaret, whose eyes sparkled. Your Grace, this is extraordinary. But surely there are librarians, scholars, men with credentials. I do not want credentials. I want someone who understands that knowledge is not just for the privileged, someone who believes we waste half of humanity's potential. Oliver held her gaze. I want someone real, someone who will make this meaningful. Melanie's mind raced. Access to one of England's finest private libraries, the chance to organize it properly, the opportunity to create a literacy program that could change lives. It was everything she had dreamed of. But complications existed, questions of propriety, the scandal of an unmarried woman working closely with a duke. I can see your hesitation, Oliver said quietly. But I am offering you not just employment, but purpose, the chance to use your mind, your talents, your passion for something that matters. He leaned forward, and she caught that familiar scent of sandalwood. I have spent my life managing estates and fulfilling duties. But this project, it is the first thing in years that feels genuinely important, and I cannot do it without someone who shares that vision. Without you. The sincerity in his voice nearly undid her. Melanie looked at the papers, at the careful planning evident in every line. The families in the villages, she said slowly, they would need more than reading circles, basic primers, materials for children, improvements to their cottages for adequate light. Yes. Oliver's face lit with enthusiasm. Exactly. What else? Melanie felt excitement unfurling inside her. If we teach adults to read, include practical materials, agricultural guides, basic medicine, household management, things that improve daily lives. Perfect. What else? A system for the children working with their mothers, so literacy becomes a family practice, and for the women specifically. She paused, then pressed on. Materials that expand horizons beyond domestic duties. History, geography, even simplified philosophy. Oliver stood, moving to the window. Mrs. Langley, he said, turning to face both women, I give you my word this arrangement will be entirely proper. Miss Hart will never be alone with me without adequate chaperonage. This is a professional engagement. I have one condition, Melanie said, surprising herself. The program must include provisions for widows specifically. Women who lose husbands often lose security. If they can read and write competently, they have options. It could mean the difference between destitution and survival. Oliver turned back, and the look in his eyes made her chest tighten. Yes, absolutely yes. Whatever you envision, we will make it real. He moved closer, withdrawing a folded document. This is the formal offer. Terms of employment, salary, expectations. My solicitor drafted it to ensure everything is legitimate. He held out the paper. As Melanie reached for it, their fingers touched. Brief, barely a moment, but the contact sent electricity coursing through her. She saw Oliver's breath catch, saw his eyes darken, and knew he felt it too. Their hands remained touching a heartbeat longer than necessary. The document transferred between them, but neither pulled away. Melanie could feel her pulse in her fingertips, the warmth of his skin against hers. Margaret cleared her throat gently. The spell broke. Oliver stepped back, his chest rising and falling more rapidly. "When can you begin?" His voice came out rougher than usual. "I should discuss this with my mother, but if she agrees—" "She will agree," Margaret said. "This is an extraordinary opportunity, Your Grace. The gratitude is mine." Oliver's eyes never left Melanie's face. To have found someone who understands, who shares this vision, it is more than I dared hope for. He bowed, preparing to leave. "I will send my carriage Monday morning, if that is agreeable. We can begin with an assessment and develop a comprehensive plan." "Monday," Melanie echoed. At the door, Oliver paused. "One more thing, Miss Hart. The reading circles, I intend to attend them myself, not as the Duke observing his charity, but as a participant. I want to learn alongside these families. Will you allow that?" Melanie's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "Yes, Your Grace. I think that is exactly what this project needs." "Oliver." She smiled, feeling warmth bloom in her chest. "Yes, Oliver. I will see you Monday." After he left, Melanie stood holding the contract, feeling the ghost of his touch still tingling on her fingers. Margaret came to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder. "That young man," Margaret said quietly, "is not offering you just employment, my dear." Melanie looked at her aunt. "Then what is he offering? A partnership, a purpose?" Margaret's smile was knowing. "And if I am not mistaken, his heart, though I suspect he does not fully realize it yet." Melanie pressed the contract to her chest, feeling her own heart racing beneath the paper. Monday suddenly felt impossibly far away, but it also felt like the beginning of something, the chance not just to be seen, but to be valued, not just for what she looked like or who she might marry, but for what she could do, what she could contribute, what she could be. Outside, she heard the carriage pull away. Inside, she stood in the fading afternoon light and let herself imagine what it might be like to work beside him every day, to share ideas and plans and dreams, to be partners in something meaningful. And if her imagination occasionally wandered beyond professional partnership to something warmer, well, that was a secret she would keep to herself, for now. Before we continue with Melanie and Oliver's story, I would love to know, are you enjoying this journey? If their story is touching your heart, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss a moment. And here is something I am curious about. If you were in Melanie's position, would you accept Oliver's proposal to work in his library, knowing it might lead to scandal? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one and love hearing what you think. The library at Ashford House was everything Melanie had imagined and more. 3 stories of books rose toward a painted ceiling, depicting classical scholars in discussion. Tall windows flooded the space with morning light, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny stars. The smell of old leather and paper wrapped around her like an embrace. But the disorder was staggering. Books piled haphazardly on tables, volumes lying open and forgotten, entire shelves arranged with no discernible logic. It would take months to properly catalogue everything. Melanie stood in the center of the main floor, turning slowly to take it all in. Beside her, Oliver watched her reaction with barely concealed anticipation. "Well?" he asked. "It is magnificent and catastrophic." She moved toward the nearest shelf, running her fingers along the spines. Greek philosophy next to agricultural treatises next to poetry. No system whatsoever. Where would you begin? Melanie pulled a small notebook from her bag, already making notes. "We need to empty one section completely. Create a proper classification system, then work through systematically, checking condition, noting additions, cross-referencing subjects." Oliver moved closer, looking over her shoulder at her notes. His proximity made her acutely aware of his warmth, the sound of his breathing. "How long do you estimate?" 6 months for a basic catalogue, a year for comprehensive documentation. She glanced up and found his face closer than expected. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither moved. "Then we should begin." Oliver stepped back, clearing his throat. "I have had the East Wing prepared for the sorting process." They worked through the morning, falling into an easy rhythm. Oliver would bring down books from the higher shelves, while Melanie examined and categorized them. He proved surprisingly knowledgeable, identifying rare editions and offering insights about various works. "This is a first edition, Milton," he said, handing her a worn volume. "My grandfather acquired it at auction in 1782. Their hands touched as she took the book. Both froze for a heartbeat before Melanie pulled away, focusing intently on the pages. "The condition is remarkable," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. "This belongs in the rare collection, under glass, as you think best." Oliver's voice held a quality she could not quite identify. "You are the expert here." By midday, they had cleared 3 shelves and begun organizing materials for the village literacy program. Melanie spread primers and simple texts across a large table, sorting by difficulty level. "The children will need picture books initially," she explained, "something engaging to hold their attention. And for the adults, practical texts. This farming manual could be invaluable." Oliver leaned over the table beside her, reaching for the same book she was touching. Their arms brushed. Neither pulled away immediately. Melanie felt heat rising in her cheeks, felt her pulse quicken at the contact. "Sorry," Oliver murmured, but his hand remained close to hers, almost touching. No harm done. She forced herself to focus on the books, though every nerve seemed attuned to his nearness. Margaret, who had been sitting by the window with her needlework, stood and stretched. "I believe I shall take some air in the gardens. Will you be quite all right here for a few moments?" "Perfectly all right," Melanie said, though her heart raced at the thought of being alone with Oliver, even briefly. After Margaret left, the library felt suddenly more intimate. Oliver moved to examine a high shelf, and Melanie watched him stretch to reach a volume just beyond his grasp. "Let me," she said, moving to the rolling ladder. "I am lighter. The ladder will hold me more safely." She climbed 3 rungs, reaching for the book. The ladder wobbled slightly. Oliver was there immediately, his hand steadying the frame, one palm flat against her back for balance. "Careful," he said quietly. Melanie retrieved the book, but found herself frozen on the ladder, hyper-aware of his hand on her back, the protective gesture, the concern in his voice. She descended slowly, and when she reached the bottom, she was standing directly in front of him, close enough to see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Always." His hand moved from the ladder to her elbow, steadying her. "I would not want you hurt." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither seemed ready to name. Then Margaret's footsteps sounded in the corridor, and they stepped apart, both busying themselves with books that suddenly required intense examination. The afternoon brought a visit to one of the estate villages. They traveled by carriage, Margaret accompanying them as chaperone. The cottages were small but well-maintained, and the families greeted their duke with a mixture of respect and genuine warmth that surprised Melanie. "Your Grace, Mrs." Davies said, curtsying while holding a baby on her hip. "We heard about the reading program. It is more than kind." "It is Miss Hart's vision," Oliver said, gesturing to Melanie. "She will be coordinating everything." Melanie moved forward, immediately engaging. "Mrs. Davies, would your older children be interested in joining the reading circles? And yourself if you wish to learn?" The woman's eyes brightened. "I always wished I could read proper. My husband reads some, but I never had the chance." "Then you shall have it now." Melanie pulled out her notebook. "We will start next week, and I noticed the windows in several cottages are quite small. Reading requires good light." Oliver was immediately attentive. "What would you recommend? Larger windows on the south side of each cottage, and better drainage to prevent damp, which ruins books and health both. Consider it done." Oliver made his own notes. "What else do you see that needs improvement?" They walked through the village together, Melanie pointing out needs while Oliver committed to solutions. He listened to her with complete attention, implementing her suggestions without hesitation. The villagers watched with barely concealed surprise as their duke deferred to a young woman's judgment. At one cottage, an elderly widow invited them inside. The space was cramped and dark, with one tiny window providing minimal light. "This is exactly what I meant," Melanie said to Oliver, then turned to the widow. "Mrs. Thompson, if you had better light and could read, What would interest you most? Receipts, the woman said immediately. For healing tinctures and such. I know them by memory, but if I could write them down, I could teach my granddaughter proper, and maybe sell them at market. Melanie felt excitement surge. This is precisely the kind of practical application we should encourage. She looked at Oliver. We need not just reading primers, but blank books for records, and simple arithmetic lessons for managing small business accounts. Yes. Oliver's eyes shone with enthusiasm that matched her own. Absolutely yes. Whatever is needed. On the ride back to Ashford House, Melanie could not contain her excitement. Did you see Mrs. Thompson's face when you promised the improvements? And Mrs. Davies wants all 5 of her children in the reading circle. I saw. Oliver's smile was genuine, transforming his usually serious expression. I also saw you identifying needs I would never have noticed. The damp problems, the window placement, the connection between literacy and economic opportunity. You see what I overlook. You listen, though. That is rarer than you might think. Their eyes met across the carriage. Margaret dozed in the corner, and in the privacy of that moment, something shifted between them. Not just attraction, though that hummed beneath every interaction, but recognition of partnership, of shared purpose, of 2 minds working in harmony towards something meaningful. The carriage hit a rut. Melanie lurched sideways. Oliver caught her, his hands steady on her arms. For a moment she was pressed against him, could feel the solid warmth of his chest, smell the sandalwood cologne that had become so familiar. Steady? He asked, his voice low. Steady, she confirmed, but made no move to pull away. Neither did he. They remained close, closer than propriety allowed, breathing almost in unison. Melanie saw his gaze drop to her lips, saw his throat work as he swallowed. Her own breath caught. Then Margaret stirred, and they separated quickly, both looking out opposite windows, as if fascinated by the passing countryside. That evening, back at the Hart residence, Melanie recounted the day to her aunt while preparing for bed. He steadied the ladder with his hand on my back, she said quietly. And in the carriage, when I nearly fell, Aunt Margaret, the way he looked at me, the way you looked at him, Margaret observed gently. My dear, this is moving beyond professional partnership. Melanie sat on her bed, pressing her hands to her flushed cheeks. I know, and it terrifies me. What if I'm imagining his interest? What if I am merely a project to him, like the library? Did he look at the library the way he looks at you? Melanie laughed despite her anxiety. No, he did not. Then perhaps you should trust what you see, what you feel. Margaret kissed her forehead. Now rest. Tomorrow brings more work, and more opportunities for hands to touch and eyes to meet, and all the small intimacies that lead to larger ones. After Margaret left, Melanie lay in darkness, reliving every touch, every glance, every moment when the space between them had seemed to crackle with unspoken possibility. The library work was fulfilling beyond anything she had imagined, but increasingly it was not the books that made her heart race. It was the man helping her organize them, whose eyes followed her around the room, whose touch lingered longer than necessary, who looked at her as if she held answers to questions he was only beginning to ask. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, she dreamed of ladders and steady hands, of carriages and close quarters, of a future that might hold more than just catalogues and reading circles, a future that might hold something both terrifying and wonderful, if only she was brave enough to reach for it. The dining room at Westbrook House glowed with candlelight reflected in crystal and silver. Lord George had arranged an intimate dinner, 12 guests, but the names represented London's most influential families. Melanie sat near the middle, acutely aware she was the least significant person present. Across from her, Lady Catherine Reynolds held court. To her left, Lord Pemberton discussed politics, and at the head Oliver presided with quiet authority. But throughout the meal, Oliver kept redirecting conversations toward her, seeking her opinion, drawing her into discussions that would normally exclude her. Miss Hart has been working on the Ashford House Library restoration, he said. Her organizational system is revolutionary. Tell them about your classification approach, Melanie. The use of her Christian name sent ripples around the table. Melanie felt heat rise but held composure. It is based on subject matter cross-referenced with author and date. This allows multiple access points for research. Additionally, I am implementing a lending system for the estate families. Lending books to tenants? Lady Reynolds's tone carried disdain. How novel. Knowledge should not be hoarded. Oliver's voice held an edge. Miss Hart understands that an educated populace benefits everyone. Her literacy programs will transform our villages. The message was clear. Anyone who dismissed Melanie would answer to him. After dinner, they moved to Ashford House Ballroom. At least 60 guests filled the space, blazing with light. An orchestra tuned on a raised platform. Melanie stood near a column with Margaret, wearing deep burgundy silk that highlighted her figure. Her dark hair arranged elegantly with small garnets scattered through it. "You look beautiful," Margaret whispered, "and he cannot take his eyes off you." The orchestra began. Couples moved toward the floor. Oliver walked directly to where Melanie stood, declining several obvious attempts to secure him as partner. "Miss Hart." He bowed formally, but his eyes held warmth. "Would you do me the honor of this dance?" The first dance, the opening waltz, the most public declaration possible. Melanie heard gasps, felt every eye turning. "Your Grace, Oliver, please, say yes." She placed her hand in his. "Yes." He led her to the center. Other couples joined, but Melanie barely noticed. All her awareness focused on Oliver's hand at her waist, warm and firm through silk. His other hand held hers, fingers intertwined. The music swelled. They began to move. Oliver held her closer than strictly proper, close enough that she could feel his body heat, smell the sandalwood cologne. "You are trembling," he said quietly. "I am nervous. This is very public. I know." His eyes held hers, dark and intense. "That is the point." They turned. Melanie saw Emily watching, face rigid with jealousy, saw her mother stunned and hopeful, saw dozens of faces registering shock. "You are making a statement," she whispered. "I am telling the truth." His hand tightened at her waist. "I am declaring that you are the woman who holds my attention, my respect, and my—" He stopped, but the unfinished sentence hung between them like a promise. They moved through the waltz in silence, but it was silence filled with unspoken words. Their bodies found a rhythm that felt inevitable. When he pulled her through a turn, she felt dizzy with something beyond spinning. The music ended too soon. Oliver held her a moment longer before releasing her waist, but he did not release her hand. Instead, he led her toward the terrace doors. Margaret followed at a discreet distance as they stepped into cool night air. The terrace overlooked gardens lit with lanterns. Other couples strolled below, but the terrace was relatively private. Oliver led her to the stone balustrade. For a long moment they stood side by side, looking at the gardens. "I have been thinking," Oliver said finally, "about what matters, about what I want my life to mean." He turned to face her, moonlight catching his features. "I was raised to value duty above all else, position, responsibility, maintaining standards. I have spent 33 years being the duke everyone expected, appropriate, predictable, empty. You are not empty. I was. Until I saw you standing against that wall, bearing your isolation with such dignity. Until I watched you speak about Beatrice with passion. Until I witnessed you transform my library into something meaningful and saw you identify needs in my villages I had been too blind to see." He stepped closer, close enough that she tilted her head back to maintain eye contact. "I looked for beauty in ballrooms. I looked for accomplishment and breeding, and everything society told me to value. But I found something more important. I found character, substance, truth. I found you." Melanie's breath came shallow and quick. "Your Grace—" "Oliver. Say my name, Melanie." "Oliver." The word came out as barely more than a whisper. "I'm going to ask you something." His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones with exquisite gentleness. "Will you marry me?" The world seemed to stop. Melanie stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You cannot mean we have known each other mere weeks. I have known you enough. I have seen your mind, your heart, your courage." His thumbs continued their gentle caress. "I am asking you to be my wife, my partner, my equal in every way that matters." Tears spilled down Melanie's cheeks. "This cannot be real. Dukes do not marry wallflowers." Let me worry about society." His voice intensified. "I am asking what you want. Do you feel what I feel? This connection between us?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I feel it." "Then say yes. Marry me. Let me spend my life earning the right to stand beside someone as remarkable as you." Melanie reached up, placing her hands over his. "Yes. God help us both. Yes." Oliver's expression transformed, joy breaking across his features like sunrise. He pulled her closer and she went willingly, wrapping her arms around his neck as his came around her waist. They stood pressed together, foreheads touching, breathing the same air. "Thank you," he whispered against her skin. "Thank you for seeing me, for being real, for saying yes." Behind them, Margaret cleared her throat gently. "Congratulations, but perhaps we should return before gossip becomes too scandalous." Oliver laughed. "Pure happiness. Tomorrow I will speak to your mother formally. Tonight, let me dance with you again. Let me show everyone that you are mine, and I am yours." They returned to the ballroom together. Oliver made the announcement simply. He and Miss Melanie Hart were engaged to be married. The reaction was explosive. Shock, delight, envy, confusion. But through it all, Oliver kept Melanie's hand in his, a public claiming that left no room for doubt. They danced twice more that night, closer each time, speaking little but saying everything through touch and glance. And when the evening ended, when Melanie finally returned home in the Duke's carriage with Margaret beside her, she pressed her fingers to her lips, where Oliver had kissed them in farewell, and let herself believe in the impossible. A wallflower had captured a duke, not through beauty or strategy or performance, but through being exactly who she was. And tomorrow, the real journey would begin. The ceremony had been small, conducted in the chapel at Ashford House with only immediate family and close friends present. Melanie had worn ivory silk that caught the afternoon light, her dark hair crowned with orange blossoms. Oliver had looked at her as if she were the only person in the world, his voice steady as he spoke the vows that bound them together. Now, as evening settled over the estate, Melanie stood in the doorway of their private chambers, heart racing with anticipation and nervousness in equal measure. The room glowed with candlelight. Soft music drifted up from the celebration below, muted and distant. The bed dominated the space, draped in deep blue velvet and piled with pillows. But it was Oliver who held her attention, standing by the window in his shirt sleeves, waistcoat unbuttoned, looking more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. He turned as she entered, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. Not just desire, though that burned in his eyes, but tenderness, wonder, love so profound it seemed to fill the space between them. "Melanie," he said softly. "My wife." The word sent shivers through her. "Oliver." He crossed to her slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wished, but she did not move. She had chosen this, chosen him. And whatever nervousness she felt was matched by wanting, by the accumulated tension of weeks of restrained touches and heated glances. Oliver stopped before her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. His hands came up to frame her face, the gesture now familiar but no less affecting. "Are you frightened?" he asked. "A little." She met his eyes honestly. "But not of you." "Never of you. We can wait. There is no rush. We have our entire lives." But Melanie shook her head, placing her hands on his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palms. "I do not want to wait. I want this. I want you." Something darkened in Oliver's expression, desire flaring hot and immediate, but he moved with deliberate gentleness, leaning down to press his forehead against hers. "Tell me if anything is too much," he whispered. "Tell me what you need." Then he kissed her. It started soft, almost tentative, a question rather than a demand. Melanie rose on her toes, pressing closer, answering with her lips and her body. The kiss deepened, became something hungrier. Oliver's arms came around her waist, pulling her against him, and she felt the solid warmth of him, the strength barely restrained. His hands moved to the pins in her hair, removing them one by one with patient care. The dark mass tumbled down her back, and Oliver buried his fingers in it, the touch making her gasp against his mouth. "Beautiful," he murmured. "I have wanted to do this since the garden party. since I first saw you." He kissed her jaw, her throat, the sensitive place behind her ear that made her knees weak. Melanie's hands clutched at his shoulders, then moved lower, exploring the planes of his back through the thin linen of his shirt. "May I?" Oliver's fingers found the buttons at the back of her gown. "Yes, please." He worked the buttons slowly, kissing each new inch of skin revealed. The gown slipped from her shoulders, pooling at her feet in a whisper of silk. Melanie stood in her chemise and corset, feeling exposed but not ashamed. The way Oliver looked at her, as if she were precious, as if she were art, made her feel beautiful. His turn. She reached for his shirt, pulling it free from his trousers. Oliver helped her, shrugging out of the fabric. Melanie pressed her palms against his bare chest, feeling the warmth of his skin, the steady beat of his heart, the slight roughness of hair beneath her fingers. They stood like that for a long moment, exploring each other through touch, learning the geography of bodies soon to be joined. Oliver's hands traced her shoulders, her arms, the curve of her waist. Melanie let her fingers wander across his chest, his abdomen, feeling muscles tense beneath her touch. "The corset," Oliver said, his voice rough with desire. "May I?" "Yes." He turned her gently, his fingers working the laces with more skill than she expected. The pressure released gradually, and she drew a deep breath as the garment fell away. Now only the thin chemise remained, and through it she could feel the heat of Oliver's body as he stepped close behind her. His lips found the back of her neck, kissing along her spine while his hands came around to rest on her stomach, pulling her back against him. Melanie let her head fall back against his shoulder, a small sound escaping her throat. "I love you," Oliver whispered against her skin. "I need you to know that. This is not just desire. This is love." Melanie turned in his arms, reaching up to pull his face down to hers. "I love you too. I think I have loved you since you looked back at me in that ballroom." They kissed again, deeper this time, all restraint dissolving. Oliver lifted her easily, carrying her to the bed. He laid her down on the soft coverlet, following her down, his weight pressing her into the mattress in a way that felt safe rather than confining. His mouth traced a path from her lips to her throat, down to her collarbone. His hands moved over her body with reverence and growing urgency. Melanie arched into his touch, her own hands exploring, learning what made him gasp, what made his breath catch. The chemise disappeared. Then the rest of their remaining clothes, cast aside without ceremony. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, skin against skin, no barriers remaining. "You are everything," Oliver said, his voice breaking slightly. "Everything I never knew I needed." "Then show me," Melanie whispered, pulling him closer. "Show me what this love means." He did. They moved together slowly at first, learning each other's rhythms, adjusting to the newness of complete intimacy. Oliver was careful, attentive to her reactions, asking without words if she was all right, if this was good, if she wanted more. Melanie answered with her body, with the way she pulled him closer, with the sounds that escaped her lips as pleasure built. The initial discomfort faded into something else, something that grew with each movement, each kiss, each whispered word of love and encouragement. Oliver's control began to slip, his movements becoming less measured, more instinctive. Melanie matched him, following where sensation led, trusting him completely. They found a rhythm that belonged to them alone, bodies moving together as if they had been created for exactly this joining. When release came, it was mutual and overwhelming. Oliver buried his face in her neck, speaking her name like a prayer. Melanie held him, trembling with the force of what had passed between them, feeling tears slip down her temples from the intensity of it all. They lay tangled together afterward, hearts gradually slowing, breathing evening out. Oliver rolled to his side, pulling her with him, keeping her close. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her shoulder, her arm, her hip. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Melanie smiled against his chest. "I am more than all right. I am happy. Truly happy, as am I." Oliver kissed the top of her head. "I did not know such happiness existed until you." They dozed, woke, loved again with less urgency, but no less passion. The second time was slower, playful even, with laughter mixed in with sighs. They explored each other without the pressure of first-time nervousness, finding what gave pleasure, what made the other gasp or moan or grip the sheets. As dawn approached, they lay facing each other, Melanie's head pillowed on Oliver's arm, his other hand resting possessively on her waist. "Every day," he said quietly, "every day from now on, I get to wake beside you. I get to love you. I get to be loved by you." "Every day," Melanie agreed, pressing a kiss to his chest. "We get to build this life together. Partners in everything." "Partners in everything," Oliver echoed. He pulled her closer, and she went willingly, tucking herself against him as if she had been designed to fit exactly there. Outside, the first light of morning painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. But inside their chamber, wrapped in each other's arms, Oliver and Melanie existed in a world of their own making. A world where a wallflower and a duke had found each other across a crowded ballroom and chosen love over expectation, authenticity over performance, passion over propriety. It was only the beginning, but what a beginning it was. 3 months into their marriage, Melanie stood in the great hall of Ashford House, reviewing plans with the estate manager. She wore a dress of soft grey wool, practical but elegant, her hair arranged in a simple twist. The transformation from overlooked wallflower to duchess had been swift, but she was learning to inhabit the role with the same authenticity she brought to everything else. "Your Grace," the manager said, gesturing to the architectural drawings spread across the table. "The new windows for the village cottages are nearly complete, and the drainage improvements have already made a significant difference." "Excellent." Melanie studied the plans with careful attention. "And the reading room we discussed, the one where families can gather during winter months? Construction begins next week, my lady, as you specified." A warm hand settled on her shoulder. Oliver had entered silently, as was his habit, and now stood beside her examining the drawings with approval. "You are revolutionizing the estate," he said softly, pride evident in his voice. "We are revolutionizing it," she corrected, turning to smile at him. "These were your ideas as much as mine. The ideas, perhaps, but the vision, the follow-through, the attention to detail that makes them actually work, that is entirely you." The manager discreetly gathered his papers and withdrew, leaving them alone in the hall. Oliver pulled Melanie closer, dropping a kiss on her temple in the casual affection that had become natural between them. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Well. Perhaps a bit tired, but well." His hand moved from her shoulder to rest gently on her stomach, a gesture he had begun making more frequently in recent weeks. "And?" Melanie placed her hand over his, feeling warmth bloom in her chest. "And I think we might have news to share. Soon. But I want to be certain before we say anything." Oliver's face lit with joy so pure it made her eyes sting. "Truly, truly. I have missed 2 cycles now, and this morning I felt," she paused, searching for words, "different. In a way I cannot quite explain, but feel significant." He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of glass. "A child. Our child. Do not get too excited yet. It is early. These things can be uncertain." But Oliver shook his head, pressing his forehead to hers. "I know it. I feel it. We are going to have a baby." They stood together in the quiet hall, the future suddenly taking shape around them, with new clarity and purpose. The afternoon brought the weekly reading circle in the village. Melanie rode in the carriage with Margaret, who had become a permanent fixture in their household, and arrived to find nearly 30 people gathered in the new community space. Children sat cross-legged on the floor, each holding one of the primers Melanie had carefully selected. Adults perched on benches along the walls, their faces a mixture of concentration and pride. And in the corner, Mrs. Thompson sat with her granddaughter, both bent over a book of herbal remedies. "Your Grace," the elderly widow called out. "Look, Sarah can read 3 whole pages now without help." The girl beamed, her finger tracing words as she read aloud in a halting but determined voice. Melanie felt emotion well up, the kind that came from witnessing genuine transformation. Oliver arrived shortly after, having ridden from his meeting with tenants. He settled on a bench among the adults, opening a primer alongside them, participating rather than observing. Several farmers glanced at him uncertainly at first, but he smiled and asked for help with a difficult passage, immediately putting them at ease. This, Melanie thought, watching him, This is who he truly is beneath the title and expectations. A man who wants to learn, to grow, to be part of something meaningful. After the reading circle, a familiar carriage arrived. Emily emerged, her expression uncertain. She had written requesting permission to visit, and Melanie had agreed despite her mother's objections. "Cousin," Emily said, curtsying more deeply than necessary, "thank you for seeing me. Come inside." Melanie led her to a small parlor away from the others. Tea appeared, along with cakes that neither touched. "I owe you an apology," Emily began, her fingers twisting in her lap. "Many apologies. I was cruel, jealous. I saw you as competition when I should have seen you as family. You wanted what I had. I wanted what I thought you had." Emily's voice broke slightly. Position, security, a duke's attention. But watching you these past months, seeing what you have built here, what you and the duke share, I understand now that I was chasing the wrong things. Melanie studied her cousin's face, seeing genuine remorse where once had been only rivalry. What changed? "I met someone." Emily's cheeks flushed. "A gentleman farmer. Not wealthy, not titled, but kind. Good, real. And when he looks at me, I feel seen in a way I never did at all those balls and parties." She paused. "The way the Duke looks at you. That is what I want. Not the title. The connection." Melanie reached across and took her cousin's hand. "Then I am happy for you. Truly. Can we start again? Be family rather than competitors?" "Yes." Melanie squeezed her hand. "I would like that very much." They spent the next hour talking, truly talking, sharing hopes and fears and dreams. When Emily left, she embraced Melanie with real warmth, and Melanie felt a piece of her past settle into place with new understanding. That evening, Melanie found Oliver in the library, surrounded by books and correspondence. He looked up as she entered, his expression immediately softening. "How did it go with Emily?" "Better than expected. I think we might actually become friends, real ones, not just cousins by obligation." "I am glad." Oliver set aside his papers and held out his hand. "Come here." She went to him, settling on his lap in the large leather chair. He wrapped his arms around her, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I have been thinking," he said, "about names. If it is a girl, perhaps Margaret after your aunt. And if a boy, we have months before we need to decide such things." "I know, but I like thinking about it, planning our future." His hand settled on her stomach again. "This life we are building." Melanie leaned back against him, feeling safe and cherished and complete. 3 months ago, I was a wallflower. Now I am a wife, a duchess, possibly a mother. Sometimes I cannot believe this is real. It is real. Oliver turned her face toward his, kissing her softly. "As real as anything I have ever known. You transformed my life, Melanie. You made me want to be better, do better, live with purpose rather than just duty. We transformed each other." They sat together as the fire burned low, talking quietly about the reading program's expansion, about winter preparations for the estate, about all the small and large dreams that filled their days. And later, when they retired to their chambers, they made love with the easy intimacy of partners who knew each other's bodies as well as their minds. Melanie fell asleep wrapped in Oliver's arms, his hand resting protectively over where their child grew. She dreamed of libraries and reading circles, of children learning and families thriving. But mostly she dreamed of the man beside her, the unlikely love that had begun with a glance across a ballroom and had grown into something that filled every corner of her life with meaning and joy. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Catherine still struggled with her daughter's elevated position. Society still whispered about the wallflower duchess. The estate required constant attention, and the literacy program demanded ever more resources and energy. But tonight, Melanie was simply happy, deeply, profoundly happy in a way she had never imagined possible. And beside her, Oliver slept with a slight smile on his lips, his dreams no doubt as full of hope and promise as her own. Autumn sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the morning room at Ashford House, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. Melanie sat in a comfortable chair near the window, one hand resting on her swollen belly where their child, due within weeks, moved and stretched with increasing urgency. October 1818. A full year since that first waltz, since the proposal under stars, since everything had changed. Oliver entered carrying a stack of letters, his face bright with the kind of joy that had become habitual. He knelt beside her chair, pressing a kiss to her stomach, before looking up at her with eyes full of wonder. "Active this morning?" "Very. I think he or she is practicing for their arrival." Melanie laughed as a small foot pressed visibly against her dress. "Feel." Oliver placed both hands on her belly, his expression transforming to awe as he felt their child move beneath his palms. "Incredible. Every time absolutely incredible. You say that as if you have not been feeling it for months, because every time is a miracle." He looked up at her, love so evident in his gaze it made her chest tight. "You are a miracle." A knock at the door interrupted them. Margaret entered, followed by Catherine. Melanie's mother had softened considerably over the past year, her initial shock at her daughter's elevation giving way to genuine pride, and, finally, to something resembling humility. "Melanie, dear, how are you feeling?" Catherine settled into a nearby chair, her concern genuine rather than performative. Large, uncomfortable, impatient, but otherwise well. "The doctor says another 3 weeks," Margaret added, taking up her needlework. "Though babies come when they choose, regardless of schedules, rather like their mother," Oliver said with a smile, determined to do things their own way. More letters arrived throughout the morning. Teachers from 3 neighboring estates requesting information about implementing similar literacy programs. A note from Lord George announcing his engagement to a sensible young woman who loved books nearly as much as she loved him. And a thick envelope from Emily, now Mrs. Emily Thornton, describing her contentment in married life and inviting them to visit her modest but happy home. "She sounds genuinely happy," Melanie said, reading Emily's letter aloud. "Listen to this. I wake each morning grateful for a life built on truth rather than pretense. You showed me that was possible, cousin. Thank you." Oliver squeezed her hand. "You have changed more than just my life. You have ripples spreading outward, touching people in ways you may never fully know." "We have those ripples," she corrected. "This was never just me." The afternoon brought visitors. Mrs. Thompson and her granddaughter Sarah arrived with a basket of late-season apples and a handwritten receipt book. Sarah's careful script documenting every healing tincture her grandmother knew. "For the baby," Mrs. Thompson said, presenting Melanie with a small bottle. "Chamomile and lavender. For peaceful sleep, thank you." Melanie accepted the gift with genuine gratitude. "And Sarah, your writing is beautiful. You should be very proud." The girl beamed. "I am teaching 2 other girls now, Your Grace." "Passing it on like you said." After they left, Oliver pulled Melanie close, his arms wrapping carefully around her expanded middle. "This is what we built," he said quietly. "Not just a program or a library, but hope, opportunity, the chance for people to be more than circumstances would have allowed." Melanie leaned back against him, feeling their child shift between them, a physical reminder of the future they had created. "I never imagined I could have this, any of this." That night at the ball, standing against that wall, if someone had told me what was coming, would you have believed them? No, never. It seemed too impossible, too much like a dream. Oliver turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "You made it real. Your courage, your authenticity, your refusal to pretend to be anything other than yourself. That is what changed everything." They walked through the library together, moving slowly to accommodate Melanie's bulk. The space had been transformed, organized, catalogued, alive with purpose. Books arranged by the system she had developed, with sections now labeled for easy navigation. A large table held materials ready for the next distribution to village reading circles. Oliver pulled down a familiar volume, the first edition Milton from months ago. "Do you remember the day we found this? You nearly touched my hand reaching for it. I thought I might faint from the electricity of almost contact. Almost contact." He laughed, setting the book aside and pulling her as close as her belly allowed. "How innocent we were. How much we were holding back. And now? Now there is nothing held back. Now I know every part of you. And you know every part of me." Oliver's hand traced her jaw, his touch infinitely tender. "Now we are bound together in every way that matters." They kissed, slow and sweet, a kiss of partnership and promise rather than passion. Though passion still burned between them, even 8 months pregnant, Melanie felt desire when Oliver looked at her that way. But now it was tempered with something deeper, a love that had been tested by daily life and found strong enough to bear any weight. Evening brought them to the window seat in their private sitting room, the same spot where they had spent countless evenings planning, dreaming, simply being together. The sun set in brilliant oranges and purples, painting the sky like an artist's canvas. "What are you thinking?" Oliver asked, his arm around her shoulders. "That I am happy." Melanie's voice caught slightly. "That I spent so many years believing I would never have this. Love, partnership, purpose, family. And now I have all of it. Sometimes the gratitude overwhelms me. I know." Oliver pressed his lips to her hair. "I feel it too. This sense of having been given something precious. Something we must protect and nurture and never take for granted." Their child kicked strongly as if agreeing. Both laughed, Oliver's hand immediately moving to feel the movement. "Soon," he said, "soon we will meet this little person, our daughter or son. The next chapter of our story. Our story that began with a glance across a ballroom." "No." Oliver turned her face toward his. "Our story began long before that. It began the moment you decided to be authentically yourself, even when the world told you that was not enough. It began when I finally saw what mattered beyond duty and expectation. We were preparing for each other without knowing it." Melanie felt tears slip down her cheeks, the emotional intensity of late pregnancy making everything feel sharper, more profound. "I love you. So much it frightens me sometimes. This happiness, what if something happens to take it away? Then we will face it together, as we face everything. Partners in all things, remember? Partners in all things," she echoed. They sat together as darkness fell, watching the first stars appear in the deepening sky. Behind them, the library awaited another day of work. Below, the villages held families whose lives had been changed by education and opportunity. And throughout the estate, improvements continued. Better housing, better drainage, better prospects for everyone under Oliver's care. But in this moment, in this quiet space between day and night, Melanie and Oliver simply existed together. A duchess and a duke, a wife and a husband. A woman and a man who had found each other across the divide of social expectation and chosen love over everything else. The baby moved again, strong and insistent. Soon there would be 3 of them, and then their family would continue to grow and evolve. There would be challenges, there always were. Catherine still occasionally reverted to her old patterns. Society still whispered about the unusual duchess and her radical ideas. The estate required constant vigilance and care, but none of that mattered in this moment. In this moment, there was only love. The deep, abiding love of 2 people who had seen each other truly, who had chosen each other freely, and who had built a life together that honored both who they were individually and who they became together. Melanie looked at the library. 2 chairs positioned side by side, 2 cups of tea waiting on a small table, 2 lives intertwined so completely they could not be separated. She remembered the wallflower she had been, standing invisible against cream-colored walls, believing she would never be seen. But she had been seen, not for beauty or accomplishment or social position, but for character and substance and truth. And in being seen, she had learned to see herself differently, not as lacking but as complete, not as invisible, but as worthy of love and partnership and all the joy that came with being authentically herself. Outside, the stars grew brighter. Inside, Oliver held her close, his hand on her stomach, feeling their child move beneath his palm. And in that perfect moment, Melanie understood what she had always been searching for but never quite believed she would find. Home. Not a place, but a person. Not security, but belonging. Not performance, but presence. She had found it all. And tomorrow, and every day after, she would wake beside the man who had looked across a ballroom and seen not a wallflower, but a woman worth knowing, worth loving, worth building a life beside. It was more than enough. It was everything. Sometimes the greatest transformations begin not with grand gestures, but with the courage to be seen. Melanie learned that love finds us not when we perform perfection, but when we dare to be authentic. She stood against that wall believing she was invisible, never knowing that the right eyes were searching for exactly what she offered: truth, substance, and a heart unafraid to love deeply. Her story reminds us that we are never too overlooked, never too old, never too ordinary to be chosen by extraordinary love. Because the most powerful magic is not changing who we are, but finding someone who sees who we truly are and loves us more for it. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to leave a like. It helps others discover these stories of hope and transformation. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another journey into love, courage, and second chances. And I would love to know, where in the world are you listening to Melanie and Oliver's story? Drop your location in the comments below. Whether you are in Sao Paulo, New York, Tokyo, or anywhere in between, thank you for letting me share this story with you. Your presence here means everything.